Welcome back, everybody, to the Deconversionists. What's up, Elliot? How you doing tonight?
Hey, not too bad. How are you today?
I'm all right. I'm all right. Doing some editing and trying to work through some stuff with trying to get agents and stuff. It's been quite a challenge and very frustrating. But that's all right. We're here, and we're going to talk about the book that I'm writing about in my book called the Bible.
Yep.
And today we're going to discuss how to tell the Bible is fiction. This ought to be a fun show.
Yep.
Um, so what's we want to go ahead and kick it off for us and or talk about your day or whatever you want to do next. Let's
Yeah,
go.
sure. Absolutely. So, you know, for people that are fans of the Bible, and are also fans of fiction novels, how do you tell the difference? Because there's not a lot, in my opinion, that you can use to distinguish a fictional novel versus the Bible. Now, I can go through this point by point, but I guess I would ask you first, Ellen, like when you just encounter a book, in everyday life, you go to the library, whatever, you pick up a book, like how do you tell if that book is a true story or if it's meant to be fiction and read as such?
Well, normally it tells you.
Exactly.
It says, either says it's fiction or not fiction. I'm not one to traditionally read fiction. I'm not a big fan of fiction, although I would have to disagree with myself now, looking back on 42 years of reading and studying this fiction book. Apparently, I was a huge fan of fiction and just had no idea. But I thought it was a true story. Interesting, but yeah. So I'm not a big fan of fiction, and now I'm not a big fan of the Bible. So it actually fits my narrative.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty obvious if you're living in a modern society, you can tell the difference between fiction and nonfiction because it is categorized as such. Like you go to the library or go to a bookstore, you're going to go to the fiction section or you're going to go to the nonfiction section. So you get a pretty good idea of what you're after just by walking in the front door and looking at the labels on the walls. But once you actually get to the book, let's say there aren't categories on the walls to head to any sections, and you pick up the book. Well, how do you tell the difference? Well, there's a whole bunch of cues that we have in the modern era that tell us exactly what we're reading.
Yeah.
For one thing, you look at the author. You know exactly who wrote it from the author page or the cover even. You can open the cover and you've got a copyright. You've got a publisher. You know exactly where this book came from. You've got an introduction. You can read the back of the book. You can read about the author. Does it say if they're a novelist or are they a historian? You have all these cues. Now, every one of those things, seriously, think about this a little bit, is missing from the Bible as a whole. The closest we can come is information that has been put on the Bible thousands of years after it was actually written. So right now, if you walk into the bookstore, you go to the Bible section, you pick up a Bible, yeah, it's going to say on it, Holy Bible. It's going to tell you what version it is. If it's a newer version, like the New American Standard, it's going to have a copyright. This could tell you who published the thing. You're going to get a lot of that information. Now, if it's a study Bible, you're going to get a whole bunch of commentary at the beginning of each of those books by whoever published the study Bible, which is a really big business these days. So let's say I have a Schofield study Bible, I've got a Ryrie study Bible, and I've got a MacArthur study Bible here at home, and I've got multiple versions. I'm going to be reading their words that they've added to the book with little introductions and background history at the beginning of every one of the books inside their study Bible. But none of that stuff originally existed in the actual Bible before it was called the Bible.
Right.
You go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, you've got these writings. That's all you have. You essentially have a book back then before modern publishing. You had a book that had the cover ripped off. It had the copyright page gone. It had the author's information gone. There was no book jacket that you could read. There was nothing there to tell you where this book came from, who wrote the book, why it existed, nothing at all. So to try to get closer to the truth of, is this a fictional narrative or is this a history book or is this from a god? The only thing you had to go on was evaluating the contents themselves. And this is kind of what I want to do today, because there's a lot of clues and cues inside the Bible in the actual text itself that kind of gives away the plot, whether this is a fictional book or there's supposed to be a true story.
Right.
So I'll allow you to respond.
Yeah. Before we get into that, so one might be inclined to argue back and say, "Whoa, yeah, but Elliot, we were told this is a true story. Everybody knows it's a true story, right? I became
How?
I was given this book and I was told this is God's word. So why would just like going to a bookstore and we're told this is a true story? So why would I have any reason to question it?
Well, why would you have any reason to question anything? So I would question you back and say, well, how did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that information? You were told by whom? Were you told by the original author? Did you question him? Did you meet him? Did he, tell you, hey, I got this message from God and I'm, writing it, to bring divine information into the world? Or were you told by a pastor or your parents or a church or a professional Christian who's like an apologist type? Like, who told you that? Because the book itself, within the covers, the actual content, it doesn't really spell that out most of the time. Sometimes you get some kind of a Old Testament prophet, saying that they are speaking for God, but that Old Testament prophet you think wrote that book, like he's just a character inside the story as well. Like, how do you know it was him that wrote it? Like, without any kind of references or background information, like all you've got's the book. All you've got is the story.
Right. And really, to the degree to which a book has an effect on your life as a whole, is the degree to which you should really work hard to know whether it's true or not. Much like determining truth in reality. If you say to me you have $10 in your pocket, doesn't have a gigantic effect on my life, and there's a good chance you probably do. It's not that unreasonable. So, I can just choose to believe you, and it doesn't really have a giant outcome. It's even if I'm wrong, it's like, okay, no big deal. But if you tell me that tonight aliens are going to abduct me and take me to Mars, and that's going to be the last time I ever see my family or this life on Earth, and you were absolutely telling me the truth, and you were trying to show me evidence and all this, I'd be more inclined, if I actually believed aliens existed, to actually do a little bit of research or maybe try to protect myself or figure something out. So I would put a little more effort into that. So when it comes to the Bible, obviously this is a book that tells you how to live. This is a book that dictates your life. It is directly from the mouth of God, supposedly, and you're told that this is truth in His Word. Well, now you're talking about something that really is a big deal. It's not nearly as close to even going to a bookstore and picking up the latest fiction novel from John Grisham or whatever. That's not going to have that much effect in your life, or a true story or whatever, or a favorite book you have by, say, John Piper, if you're a Christian. Sure, it's his opinion. It's just his opinion. You're not being told this is from God. So even that's going to have more weight on you than a John Grisham novel, but not nearly as much as the Bible. So you might be inclined to say, hey, maybe I should determine for sure, before I start letting this book dictate my life, maybe I should determine whether it is actually true or not. And I think a lot of Christians don't really think about the weightiness of that. They just accept it, hook, line, and sinker, and just run with it. Probably because a lot of Christians don't spend the time really trying to study it to know how it dictates their life. Somehow they just kind of do what they want anyway, and then say it's the Bible.
Right.
But by and large, if you are the kind of person that really wants to follow this book, rather than just presupposing that it's true, like I did when I was a Christian, this is God's word because God said it is, and it says God is real. So right. I just fell into that and never questioned it. I just believed it and let it dictate my life, and actually did study it to try to follow it as best as I could. Like, sure, as people, you tend to, manipulate a little bit here and there to try to get away with stuff, whatever. But for the most part, I really did try to understand this book and what it told me to do. So, my life was highly controlled by the Bible. And I wish I'd actually taken more time to decide whether or not this is a true story or not, just because somebody told me it was.
Right. It's the Bible for Christians or anyone who believes it is a high impact belief that is going to affect your life in a very dramatic way. That's what they believe it's intended for anyway. Yeah. So the burden of proof is on the reader to make really, really sure that this is actually true and it's actually written for them and it's something that they can follow. So when I say how do you know that it's that the Bible is a true story or supposed to be a truth claim, I want to give a counter argument. So I'm sure any Christians watching this are just going to be like, because we know it's true, because we have an entire supporting culture that believed it to be a message from God, whether that is the Jewish Hebrew culture in the Old Testament that used these writings to build their lives on, believing it was from a God, and then we have the New Testament and the early church and all that entire history behind the book that puts it forward as true. So it's a cultural thing, whether it's Jewish culture or early Christian church culture. They essentially rubber stamp this or verified this to be, is supposed to be a true book, not written as fiction as such. So my retort to that would be, so I studied some Native American culture, myths and legends in college, and they had a lot of stories too about the origins of mankind, and it was very interesting that it wasn't a written culture, it wasn't a written history, but it mirrored a lot of the beliefs, myths, and legends that every other culture in the world has had since, as far as we can tell, the beginning of recorded history. Some cultures wrote it down and some didn't, but every single one of them had a collection of myths and legends that they held as truth. It was part of their religion. Like, you can go back and you can study the Roman and Greek, or the Norse gods. There's a lot of legends that have eventually, from oral tradition, been written down as, in their opinion at the time, actual history of real beings that interacted with the world. So, why is the Bible any different? Like, we don't believe any of those myths, legends, and origin stories at all, but somehow we hold this one, as a Christian, to be totally true and intended as real history. It's kind of a puzzle. Like, why accept one but not accept any of the others at all? So you're always going to have that mystery behind the origins of the books, because we also don't know who originally came up with, like, the idea of Thor or Loki or Zeus or Jupiter, or Vishnu or the Buddha. Like, we can't track those down to like a specific author or holy man who came up with that. And my claim is you also can't do that with the Bible either. You have your legendary characters like Moses or Abraham or Isaiah, but, like, how do you track them down in history with an outside source or reference that's going to verify the stories and claims of the Bible that these were actual people? Like, you only have the source material itself. You only have the Bible itself. Right. You can't find this stuff anywhere referenced in archaeology or secular history or any other written historical record. So in the end, honestly, if you're going to be honest with yourself as a Christian, you just have the Bible. You have to use the content of the Bible to determine whether it is, written as truth or it's written as fiction or legend or poetry or, something else that maybe, since you weren't part of that culture, you're just not aware of.
Right. So some will argue, oh yeah, but people do mention Jesus and they do mention Paul, second, third century, so early. And it's like, okay, yeah, but they're still not contemporaries, and they bought it too. They got hoodwinked as well. And so they're just going with the same thing you're going with. It just happens to be closer to the time, but that doesn't change the fact that they weren't contemporaries. So, we still have no reason to believe that like Jesus of all people was really a Messiah that was unique in this story, because there's nobody that wrote about him. Like the events that took place in the Bible story they're so dramatic and like out of the norm of reality that you can't, like, it seems impossible for me to think that there would not be some stories lingering. We still do have writings from people in the first century. So right. Of all the ones that got dismissed, like, how? And, some common arguments, well, the Romans got rid of it. Okay. But still, I just have a hard time.
It's frustrating because, like, the further back you go in history, the harder things are to verify. the harder it is to verify that there's a historical character. So if we go all the way back to like Adam, it's going to be impossible to verify for sure in some way, in some written record outside of the Bible or in some kind of archaeology. Like it's going to be almost just, well, it is impossible to verify if Adam was a real person. But the farther, the more recent the events, the more recent the characters, it should be easier and easier to find more and more evidence. So if we go all the way to the end of the Bible, where we've got Jesus and we've got the Apostle Paul, even Paul and Jesus, you would expect there to be some kind of external verification that we would process or material we could use to verify that they were real people. But even for them, we find nothing. Like, where's the extra biblical source? Let's just take Paul. Like, I accept Paul was a real person. Like, I'm not arguing that fact one way or the other. Like, we've got his letters. We can verify maybe half of them to being from the same writer. You know, it's not controversial to say Paul did exist. I got no problem with that at all.
No, especially since Clement probably verified that. So I mean, that's not crazy at all.
Right. But it's still really, really difficult. It's more difficult than it should be, because where can I read an extra biblical writing that talks about Paul personally? The only thing I really know about Paul's life comes from the book of Acts,
right,
and comes from some of Paul's letters. I can't read so let's list off some of the early church fathers that people like to refer to. There's Irenaeus. There's help me out here. I used to have the list right on the top of my head.
Josephus.
Josephus is but he's not an early church father. Let's just
just church fathers, not historians. Okay,
right? So Clement, Irenaeus, and then there's a guy who quotes Irenaeus a lot. Man, I wish I had the list in front of me. Anyway, let's take these early church fathers people like to reference. Where in their writings can I find a description?
You might have been going for Eusebius.
That's one of them. Yeah. Okay. But these are the guys who put the actual names on the books of the New Testament, like the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We can trace that back, I believe, just to Irenaeus, and then the other early church fathers that followed after him. They quoted him as a source for how we know those names, but Irenaeus never actually says why he thinks that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It seemed to have been at the time just kind of an oral tradition that that's who wrote them, and he was sort of saying, yeah, this is it. But we don't have references. We don't have extra biblical accounts. We don't have any documents. Like, I can't read about Paul's life from the earliest church father who actually wrote things about Christianity. I got nothing. Nobody can say, well, hey, I knew Paul personally. This is the kind of guy he was. This is some of the things he did. Like, there's nothing there. I can't know anything about Paul and his life outside of the New Testament. There's just a brick wall. It's a dead end. But he's the last guy. Maybe if you might include John, but he's like the last guy who actually wrote the source material, and I don't know anything about him except from his own mouth, from his own writings. I can't verify him. Right.
It's all, yeah, you're right. It's all self-verified, which, an autobiography is essentially what we're saying is that Paul wrote an autobiography. And so a lot of the claim is it must be true, because why would Paul lie about his own life?
Yeah. But that's got to assume it.
Well, that's just it. I mean, and interestingly, the types of claims that Paul makes in his autobiography, in his story, and the things that he writes about are never accepted by Christians when anybody else makes that claim or those claims. Just Paul or just the apostles. But you bring in anybody extra biblical, any random Yahoo that comes along and says, hey, I had, whatever. And they're going to, I rose from the dead. They're going to be like, no, you didn't. Or I was born of a virgin, or I know somebody born of a virgin. They're going to be like, no, you don't. That right. Doesn't happen.
Or God came down and appeared to me while I was, traveling down the road, and I saw a great light and heard a great voice, and I, basically was stricken down in the middle of the road and was blinded for 3 days or whatever, and he told me all these things. Like, nobody believes that.
So interestingly, I think in more recent years, it's becoming more of a trend to have these out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, and it's starting to be accepted more and more that, oh, maybe they did see God, because I think what we have is an insufficient amount of evidence to actually verify the biblical story. And I think they know that that's the case. They don't have any evidence to be able to say, hey, we know for certain that the Bible is true. We know for certain these stories are true because here's the evidence for it. And you can't. So you have to just take it on faith. This is my big beef with religion and Christianity, especially. It's just, it literally comes down to faith. You get to a point where you're like, well, there's some evidence that appears to support what we're thinking. Okay, great. But is that enough to definitively know? Well, sure. How? You just got to have faith. So it always just comes down to faith. Well, faith is becoming asinine now. It's silly. There is no good reason to believe something by faith because anything can be believed by faith. You just make it up. So the best we're going with now is, hey, God's starting to appear to people again. He's showing himself in these dreams. And even that can't be verified. None of those are true stories either. I've yet to see anybody, actually meet somebody that genuinely had a vision that they can show me and demonstrate or do it more than once. They've even done these tests right in hospital rooms where they have like notes and stuff on top of that, on furniture and stuff. And they want the person who's leaving their body to read something that's not typically in the room so that it's not something they can just like make up or conjure or pretend like it happened. It's actually like you have to be able to verify it to show that you literally had an out-of-body experience or whatever. And nobody can ever do it. It's never once has that test been passed.
So that's an interesting topic, which I think that in itself merits like an entire episode, because I recently in the last month had a long discussion with somebody on the out-of-body experience phenomenon, and I had to go back and read the actual scientific material on that to like get a better understanding of that once again. And it has a very interesting history, and there's a lot of false information floating around on the internet about these out-of-body experiences. And people they misunderstand the studies that have taken place. Like they've actually tested this stuff, and there's a lot to it. So I think we should discuss that in full soon.
Sure. Maybe we can even find somebody who's had one.
Yeah, that would be very, very interesting. Yeah, and we've all had. But just to suffice to say that those experiences happen, like not just in Christianity, they happen in every religion and every culture, and they've happened since probably the beginning of time. And we throw most of them out. If you're a Christian, you throw all of them out if they're not related to Christianity and they don't support Christianity in some way. And people will even say, well, if the out-of-body experience you had contradicts the scripture, then it wasn't really from God. Like, okay, so it's like a not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's confirmation bias. It's selection bias.
No matter how many times Mother Mary's come to somebody, that's just not an acceptable visit. That's just not real.
Yeah, the Protestants don't accept a single appearance of Mary whatsoever.
But then you have in Hebrews 1:1, I think it is, God spoke and finally in His Son. I think that's Hebrews 1:1. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but there's a whole case there that the writer of Hebrews is making, that once upon a time he spoke through prophets and fire and bushes and things like that, but finally he spoke in his Son, and that's the final word. Supposedly all we need is in the canon. Like there's no extra biblical stuff that God is still revealing to people. Everything he's revealed that he's going to reveal is in the Bible. So if he's coming and he's telling people new stuff today, why isn't he including that in the Bible? Why is just one individual getting the right to have this information, and it's something beyond what the Bible actually says?
Right.
And if it is in the Bible and it's not contradicting the Bible, then what do you need the vision for? That seems useless. God's not helping in any case. So, the whole concept of having a vision with God today is a contradictory idea. It just doesn't even follow the text.
And it gets interestingly, it gets as we progress throughout the millennia and centuries here, it gets harder and harder to form a new religion based on personal revelation. We saw it happen with Joseph Smith, creating essentially a massive spin-off on Christianity, using the source material and then coming up with his own personal revelation and writing an entirely new, essentially new scripture. And for some reason that really took. because of the time and place that he did that in. But good luck doing that now. Seriously, a lot of people have tried. For example, let's just take David Koresh, since he's been in the news with a Netflix special recently. Like he claimed that he was like the second coming of Jesus, and he tried to do exactly what, well, not exactly, but a similar thing that Joseph Smith did, and it went basically nowhere. He got a couple hundred followers, and then it's where's David Koresh's new religion now? Like, it's harder and harder to do in the modern era. People aren't going to listen to that. But anyway, you mentioned faith and how you have to take the Bible on faith that it's actually from a God. Well, let's take, I'll do a little kind of thought experiment here, and I'll take faith off the table. Say, okay, I can't take the Bible on faith, but I have the Bible still, and I have to evaluate it. Like, let's just take it. Let's start over, and let's read the Bible, and let's look for clues or cues on whether this is fiction or not. And I came up with a few different tells that you can read in the Scripture that is kind of gives you an indication that this is fictional. And I guess the first one that I would say is when I just read the Bible like I'm a stranger to it, I don't know anything about the book at all, it sounds like fiction. It just sounds like it. Like, if I've read a lot of fiction and then I read the Bible, like it sounds exactly like what I would expect fiction to sound like. It contains like fiction type phrases, like just the very first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Sounds very similar to Once Upon a Time, in another land. Yeah,
Galaxy Far Far Star Wars.
Galaxy Far Far Away. Yeah, it sounds exactly like that's a fictional phrase.
Right.
In the beginning, God. And there's no introduction to that. It just jumps straight into the story, which is another thing that novels and fictional accounts do. They just jump right into the story. It has a third person omniscient narrator. That's a fictional trope. Like, you don't know who's writing or who's talking. It's just this voice, this third person voice is just telling you the story. Like, how do I know that that's from God? I can't if I'm just reading the Bible for what it says. Read through Genesis. It's like, how do you know this? Like, who's talking? What's going on here? I have no idea. It's just telling me a story. Like, okay, well, that sounds exactly like fiction. I have no way to differentiate that from a historical narrative or a fictional story. There's just no way to do that.
But Elliot, there's a talking snake in the first 3 chapters.
I was just going to get to that. It has.
How do you not believe that?
Yeah, it has another indicator, another clue. This is fictional. Is that it has implausible stories that we would never, if we read them in the modern era, we would never believe that this actually happened. Like the talking snake in the Garden of Eden, or a few books later, there's a talking donkey. Forget who that story was about, but I think Balaam. Yeah. The donkey suddenly. Now, there's no precedent for that in the scriptures that lead up to that story. There's no precedent for talking animals.
Right.
It doesn't say, like, correct me if I'm wrong here, because you would probably know better as a former pastor, but does it ever say that, like, the Spirit of God came down and, like, possessed the donkey and had him, or the angel of the Lord, it's just all of a sudden the donkey is like standing in the way, refusing to move, and telling Balaam, things. It makes no sense. It just comes out of nowhere. It's an implausible.
The angel there is blocking the donkey, which is what makes the donkey scared and talk. But
okay.
The assumption is God moved his mouth. So one of the
it doesn't say that. That's the problem. It doesn't say that. It's just all of a sudden the animal is talking. Like, shouldn't have Balaam been like, what the fuck is going on here? I got an animal talking to me.
And I think it kind of was, but I think that one of the things that you see happen with the Bible and how Christians handle it is anytime there is an event that just doesn't add up and can't possibly work or make sense in reality, it's a miracle. And it's like you're just basically casting abracadabra on anything you can't explain. The flood, Noah's flood, is much like that. The amount of miracles that had to take place for that story to even happen is absurd. The text never says any of it's a miracle. It just says these things happen, but they're ludicrous. So It's a miracle. God can do anything, and that's just you just throw your hands in
I'll
the
give
air.
I'll give you the perfect example is when I believe it was Moses and Joshua during a battle. The Israelites were winning the battle, but the sun was going down, and the enemy was going to escape into the night. And so Moses raises his arms, and he basically freezes the sun for a long period of time, so that they could win the battle and kill all their enemies. That stopping of the sun is such, from what we know of cosmology and science today, is such an extreme event. Did the sun actually stop? Did the Earth stop rotating? What did the real sun keep on going? And this was like some sort of projection of the sun. Because what would happen if the sun was delayed in going to the other side of the Earth for a few hours? We would actually see that in the climate record. Like you can't delay the sun from getting to the other side of the Earth without like extreme ramifications in the natural world of something like that happening. Like, we know this doesn't happen, but in the story itself, it doesn't explain a single freaking thing about what was actually happening. It just says the sun stood still. Like,
it's a miracle.
Dude, come on.
It's a miracle. We know it happened because God does amazing things. And we also know it happened because how else do you explain the fact that we have 29 days in February sometimes, and sometimes 28?
Right.
That's the answer right there. Skip the day.
You can't just say, well, the Earth stood still or the sun stopped moving, and then just keep right on writing with the story. Like, I need to know a little bit more of, like, how exactly did that work? Like, and what were the ramifications of that? Because it go and then jump forward to the New Testament when Jesus was crucified, and the Earth was darkened for 3 hours. Okay, wouldn't we notice that? Like, what was happening there? Did they black out the sun? Did the Earth stop rotating? Like, how do you just black out the land?
I guess it's like an eclipse, right?
Yeah, but there were no. Yeah, and some people will say it could have been an eclipse, but we have no eclipses in the historical record during that time in that area. It just didn't happen. So something else is going on. Like, so we have a choice between believing it actually took place, or saying, well, it's a fictional story. Now, a reasonable person is going to say, well, what's more likely here?
Right.
It's far more likely that they just made it up.
And that's just it. I mean, you have talking animals, giant seas that are parting, suns standing still, people roaming through the wilderness without their shoes wearing out. You got resurrections from the dead. You got people walking on water. I mean, just an insane axe heads floating on water, an insane amount of things that when you look at the story, by all intents and purposes, if you're a person that's just in their right mind, so to speak, and not excusing the story for a miracle, you're saying, oh yeah, this is a fictional story. There's no question about it. You're not going to come to this story without somebody telling you first that this is God's word and think this is a true story. You're absolutely going to approach it and say, wow, this is cool, but it's fiction. Like,
right.
Because those things don't happen in real life. They just don't. And so it is, aside from faith, there's no good reason, and even faith isn't a good reason, but there is no reason to believe that this story is anything but a story.
Yeah. And one of the last ways to know that it's actually fiction is, just like fiction, whether it's a novel or it's a movie or it's just a story, it is filled with plot holes. There are so many plot holes throughout the Bible that to me it's obvious that you made these events up. You can't explain the events. There's issues with the stories, so you just paper right over them and move on, just like a plot hole in a novel or a movie. You have to suspend belief in order to immerse yourself in the story and believe that it actually happened. Like, I can't suspend belief when I've got these really serious plot holes, and I'm not even talking about contradictions, because that's a whole different topic. People argue all day about contradictions found in Scripture. I don't even need to address those. to see the plot holes in the stories. For example, I'll give you one. God creates Adam and Eve. They're sinless, and they don't know right from wrong because they haven't yet eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yet they are able to sin anyway and get judged for it, as if they knew right from wrong before they did it, even though the story is very clear that they didn't. They did not acquire the knowledge of good and evil until they ate the fruit. So that's a huge plot hole for me. It's like, how do you sin when you're sinless and you don't even know what sin is? Like, how do you know that you did wrong before you even know what wrong is? But for me, that's a plot hole. And the Bible never explains that anywhere at all, Old or New Testament. And I can't get any conclusion to that plot hole in any way. I just have to like make up theology around it. And that's my final problem with the Bible is the theology that is created almost out of thin air based on the source material. We have something in modern day fiction. We call it fan fiction. So fan fiction is, hey, I really like this novel or this movie or this story so much. I'm such a super fan of it that I'm going to write my own fiction on top of it about it, expanding the story. And that's what we have in the Christian book market, whether it's a book about Christian living or theology, or whether it's a study Bible where the author has added his own information. Christianity has 2,000-year history of creating its doctrines and its theology from the source material, but it wasn't really there in the first place. They had to make it up. It's fan fiction. Like, I mean, we have more written about expanding the doctrines of the Bible than we have written in the Bible. If I go into a Christian bookstore, pretty much the entire bookstore is nothing but people making stuff up to try to expand the source material in their own words.
Yeah. So interesting perspective you're saying there, because one of the things that I've noticed is that historic Christianity and classic theism and all of its interpretations of the Bible, as we find in history, is so vastly different than the theology that we have today of the Bible. And there's so many denominations and so many different beliefs or whatever. There are so many problems with the original Christian interpretation of the Bible, because of all the plot holes, that through the years, Christians are continuously trying to find a way to make the story true, because it doesn't make sense,
or make it make sense. Yeah,
make it make sense. So right out the gate in Genesis 1 and 2, back to back, you have conflicting creation stories. They don't match up, and they're both problematic with science. Actually, they don't fit how we understand the order of the universe to be able to function. You can't, for example, have light without the sun, and you have the light before the sun in the Genesis 1 account. That in itself is a big deal. Or vegetation growing before the sun. How's that even happening? So,
or the fact, I really like this one. Just the little verse about putting the moon in the sky. Genesis calls the moon a light.
Yeah,
to rule the night.
Right.
Well, guess what? The moon is not a light. It reflects light. And also, the moon is not out and at night all the time. I see the moon at high noon sometimes during the day. The moon is often visible all day long.
That's right.
So this is not. I mean, right there, you've broken Genesis.
Yeah, and so in an attempt to try to make it a true story, many theologians have realized the problem, and they've now gone to a covenant creation type approach. Oh, this isn't about the material universe being created. This is about a covenant being created. And that was where I ended up as a Christian. I was a full preterist. I was a covenant creationist because to me, it was the only thing that made sense, especially since, the end of the Bible now is about the destruction of Jerusalem. Because again, plot holes, the church has been wrong all this time. Jesus is clearly not coming back soon. It's been ridiculous 2,000 years later. So it's like, scratching your head. You're like, well, how are we going to make this true? So you squeeze it into the first century, the ending. And then you're like, oh, well, shit, if the end of the Bible is about that, the beginning is all a problem. Let's make the Bible beginning true too. And so now the whole entire Bible is about nothing but covenant. It has nothing to do with anything Christianity at all. It is a totally different version. It's a totally different religion that just uses the same book and yet calls itself Christianity. And so at what point do we stop and say, okay, guys, maybe we're just having fun creating interpretations of this fictional book? Because if this book was really written by God, why would it be this wrong and this complicated and this problematic and this divisive?
Right. I have a challenge for Christians. I would love them to take this challenge, but it's difficult because there's so much at stake for them. But I would challenge Christians to go back to Genesis and read the curse, just the curse, and what God says, are the consequences of sin. The first thing God curses is the snake. Now, if you read that plainly with no additional information found later in the New Testament, what do you have? You literally have God cursing a snake, taking away its legs, making it slither in the dust, eat dust all the days of its life, whatever. And then you have this weird, it's not really weird if you read it plainly. It says that, the snake will bruise his heel, yet the man will bruise the snake's head. Now, to me, that seems pretty obvious. That, or also, it says there will be enmity between the snake's offspring and the woman. Now, we have a cultural trope that women are afraid of snakes. That's pretty solid. The phobia of snakes. So why wouldn't it be trying to explain, the fear they have of snakes? And when it says bruise his heel, where do snakes strike usually when you get a snake bite? It's going to be on your foot or your leg. It's going to be down there, biting your heel. Well, back then they didn't wear boots; they wore sandals, and so a lot of snake bites were on the heel. Duh. And then what do the humans do to combat that? Well, they kill the snake. They stomp on its head. Okay, this is so obvious. Okay, how many thousands of years went by since that writing in the curse to where somebody came up with a new twist, a new interpretation, a new theology that said, oh, actually, the snake is Satan, and Satan's going to bruise Jesus' heel, and then Jesus is going to kill Satan by bruising his head. Like, I can't find that in the original curse at all, no matter how hard I try. It does not say that in any possible way. It's just not there.
Right.
Somebody wrote
fitting a prophetic fulfillment, like we talked about.
Somebody wrote up a new theology, a fan fiction, to make that story more colorful, because it just kind of didn't really work too well for, future prophecies.
Yep.
So it's a huge plot hole.
Absolutely,
in my opinion. Like, now I forget who exactly retooled that to mean Satan. Was that Jesus somewhere in the New Testament, or was that another New Testament writer that connected the snake to Satan?
I think it was Paul.
Was it Paul?
I think so.
Yeah, and I would just ask Christians, like, why would you believe Paul?
Yeah, I think he's quoting that. And so what we have in the New Testament, whether it's Paul or not, but it is one of the New Testament writers. I know that. I think it was Paul, though. And what we have is the New Testament writers just basically grabbing any statement in the Bible that looks like it could be a fulfilled prophecy, as non-specific as it may be, and they just apply it to Jesus. And because Christians just believe that the Bible is true and that Paul's story is true, even though he had one of these out-of-body experiences, this near-death vision with God. He saw Jesus in his brain, whatever. So because he said it, it must be true. And so anything he said is also true. And so all of these prophecies we talked about last week, just even like the Davidic ones that weren't even apparently originally prophecies, they were just statements, now all of a sudden becomes a prophecy just because a New Testament writer said it.
Yeah.
And again, it just comes down to literally faith, dude. It's just literally, I just believe this because I believe it. There's no grounds to think this is real.
And I've got other minor indicators that it's fiction as well. Let's just take the Psalms. The Psalms were not written as history; they weren't written as prophecy at the time. They were reinterpreted later. But the Psalms were Hebrew poetry. Poetry is not meant when it's written necessarily to be a historical narrative. It's not meant to be true. It's meant to be poetry. It's meant to be literature. It's meant to be something that makes you feel a certain way. And then there's also parables. There's a lot of parables, especially in the New Testament.
Yep.
Parables are an indicator of fiction because the parables themselves are fiction, told to get at some deeper truth. They didn't actually happen. So we're using layers upon layers here in the stories of different fictional tropes or different stories that indicate that it's fiction. I have no real good reason to believe any of this is true or history at all. And I know a lot of Christians would just, freak out right now and say, well, we have all this archaeology that backs up a lot of the things in the Old Testament. Okay, great. So this is something that I've studied a good bit, coming out of Christianity as someone who believed that was true. And then I had to reevaluate that and actually look up, how we actually know in the archaeological record that these people existed or these events happened. I can't verify any of it. No matter how hard I look, I can't. We know from the historical record and archaeology that Israel was, as a nation, during the time of, let's say, David and Solomon. Now, if you read the biblical account, you've got David building an empire, the most powerful nation in the Middle East at that time. Because when David gets to the end of his life, he was God's man of war, and by the time he passed down his kingship to Solomon, there were no enemies left for David to fight. He had defeated them all, and he had built an empire. We know from archaeology that's just not true. The closest we can come is that maybe David was a warlord of a small, village size or small city or town somewhere in Canaan. We cannot in any way verify that there was an empire of the nation of Israel that occupied that much land in the Middle East and was essentially a superpower of its time. There's nothing there. In fact, we can't even find the name David written on any inscription in the Middle East anywhere. Now, recently there's been some kind of a discovery where they found in a garbage heap a piece of pottery that may have had the name David written on it, but it can't be verified to actually mean David. That's as close as we can come, is a single inscription that maybe has the name David on it. And then it gets worse when you get to Solomon. Solomon was the wisest man in the world of all time, and he ruled the largest empire in the Middle East during that time period. And we have got no archaeological discoveries to verify that Solomon actually existed whatsoever. I've done my due diligence. I've tried. It's just not there.
Moses, also a character that is hardly believable.
Well, hey, Moses, Moses was what? The number 2 guy in Egypt for a while? Or no, was that Joseph? Joseph was Pharaoh's right-hand man for a while. And then Moses grew up in in Pharaoh's court and had a lot of power, and then led the children of Israel out of Egypt. We can't find Moses or Joseph anywhere in Egyptian history, the written record, anywhere. They're just not there. I would like to see some verification, because then I might have a reason to believe these stories are actually true, but I can't find it anywhere.
Sure. Nope, I agree. And honestly, if you just, as I've said many times, watch Myth Vision, watch Dragons in Genesis, watch History Valley, constantly demonstrating that all these things you're talking about, these stories are just not true. They are fiction. The characters are, there's no evidence they existed. And look, you don't have to be an expert in the matter to do your diligence, like you're saying. Just research it. Listen to the people that know what they're talking about. There's a reason people are experts in their field. You have to trust people who are experts in their field. We talked about that. That's the whole.
And someone who is not an expert in his field was a guy by the name of Ron Wyatt, because we have a lot of Christians that believe Ron Wyatt was a real archaeologist. He made a
Right.
lot of important, very important discoveries that verified the New Testament. And I hear his name almost every time that I talk to a fundamentalist Christian who has done any brief Googling, and they're going to come up with, oh, well, Ron Wyatt found the Ark of the Covenant, or Ron Wyatt found the Noah's Ark, and all
Yeah,
this,
no,
this stuff.
He got outed. Like he made claims that he found like wheels from the Egyptian chariots that were in the Red Sea or whatever, and he was selling them.
He even claimed
reef underneath the ocean.
That's a big one. I looked into that as well, and it's not there, but it pops up in social media constantly. Like, he did so much damage to the field of Middle East archaeology just by making up these fraudulent claims that now Christians repeat them like parrots for decades after. Another claim Ron Wyatt had was that he found a sample of Jesus' blood and had it tested, officially in a lab, and they came back and told him it had all these miraculous properties. It just didn't happen. In fact, the secular authorities in Israel have had to make up flyers for tourists who visit, like the Garden Tomb, I think it is, to warn them that, hey, we are aware of Ron Wyatt's little expedition here a number of years back, and we're just going to tell you that we also witnessed his archaeological dig, and we found absolutely nothing, and so it's not true. Just as a warning to people who come there thinking that actually took place.
Right. No, it's crazy, man. And the amount of deception that you actually see in Christianity, trying to defend and prove Christianity, is just, it is mind blowing. It's sick, actually. I mean, we want it to be so true that we'll go to a deceitful extents to make it true.
Yeah, and I had to fact check all this stuff when I was on my way out of Christianity, when I was deconverting, because I had to know if this stuff was true or not.
Yeah,
and it doesn't take very much time to fact check these wild claims of either a biblical archaeologist or a biologist or an anthropologist who's made some crazy claim about something that's been found or proven. To find that there's just nothing there. If there was something there, we would all know about it, not just Christians, and it would be a big deal. It would completely change the face of these scientific fields, and it just hasn't. It's done nothing. It's not a satanic conspiracy to suppress the truth. I'm like, how you're really going to suppress the truth of the Bible by covering it all up. Like, if this is the truth, it's going to get out.
Yeah. Yep. And on that note, I actually have to jet, so we're going to have to end it there for today. Yep. If we feel like we can continue this conversation, we can, but we're going to have to call it for the day. But yeah, hopefully everybody check out, for yourself what Elliot and I are talking about. I mean, just read the book for what it is. You'll see there would be no reason other than faith.
And I've written about all of these topics in my book, How to Stop Being a Christian. So if you want the cliff notes to everything that I've said today, just check that out. And you know what? Don't be an ignorant person who's just going to call it bullshit. You can fact check every single thing that I write about, or every single thing that I'm saying right now. You can fact check it. You have Google. This is the age of information. Don't make excuses about satanic deception or it's unverified or whatever excuse you want to come up with. Fact check it. Go to Google. You can find the truth. You don't live in 1800 anymore when you gotta do your own original research. Those times are past.
Absolutely. And on that note, we will end. I appreciate that. That was really good advice. Hey, every Christian has their own version of Christianity. We're here to unravel the con in your conversion. Have a great day, everybody.